before I get started, I wanted to draw your attention to this sink over here that is making its debut here. We'll talk later about it. But above it, we have a bowl. And if you would like to place a business card in there, we're going to have a drawing after the presentation for a copy of my book, The Healing Environments, What's the Proof? And it is based on evidence-based design, which we're going to speak a lot about tonight. Thank you so much for inviting me here. I'm honored and privileged to be in your beautiful city, and we have enjoyed the day today and the beautiful weather. Thank you. Tonight's presentation is going to be based on the aspect of how nature inspires design, and specifically how it inspires healthcare design, because we need nature to heal, and we are all one with nature. So it's a very important connection. In addition, the design inspiration is quite beautiful and healing. So we're going to combine those elements tonight. So the presentation is 3 parts. The first is a background on the theories of nature and healing. The second part is a case study for an emergency department, a very special emergency department in the nation's capital called ER1, which is an emergency room for mass casualties. Should there be another 9/11 or Katrina in the city, it's being designed for flexing for this level of emergency. And the third piece I'm going to share with you is the evidence, real evidence, in 3 different areas of both in bacteria mitigation, in positive distraction, and staff workflow that are all design interventions. May I ask here, how many are designers or architects? Okay, great. How about healthcare people? Any healthcare people? Oh, great to see you. And manufacturers and sales people? Okay. Anybody didn't fall into this category? Yeah. Oh, yes, Hillary. Okay, thank you. You fall into all of them. So we're going to talk about the power of nature. And nature does many things for us. And I think often, as we have arrived in our culture today, being a very technical culture with technology totally surrounding us, we forget that we are part of nature. The human being is actually nature. We're not a robot. We're not man-made. And as a human person, we have a connection with nature that is very strong, and we love it. So everything from the power of the sun to the power of water to our animal friends. How many have a pet? Great. Pets are very healthy for us, and there's hard evidence that proves that. So nature is powerful, and we need to recognize the power of nature. Also, it has health benefits. It can reduce stress. It does boost energy. It does reduce need for higher levels of medication. It does provide emotional support. It can be a great distraction against negative aspects in our life. It can improve patient satisfactions in healthcare facilities. So we are hardwired for biophilia. That word was coined by Edward Wilson, who was an entomologist, but the connection that we are part of nature, and as that, we need to embrace nature in helping us find solutions for very complex problems that occur in our environment. This image doesn't look like a very healing environment, but this is very typical to what we see in emergency rooms and ICUs, where we're hooked up to terrifying equipment, and the only human connection in this image is the physician who's actually holding the hand of the patient. And that can be a very powerful connection and very much needed. But we know that our medical environment is full of very complex issues that design can actually solve. Sometimes it's like, what's that fairy tale with Sleeping Beauty, where the three fairies are wishing the princess gifts when the evil fairy says the princess is going to die, and then the fairies come back and try to soften that blow. And I often feel that design is trying to do that. We have medical environments that are making it very, very difficult to live and to be healing, and then somehow design can soften those negative aspects. So we actually have tools as designers, and this isn't CAD tools, and it isn't things like colored pencils or CAD tools or software that can help us make wonderful images and describe our design process, but they're tools that we use that are part of nature. How they're tools that we can provide through design access to nature, that we can make the environment sustainable and green, and that we can use computers not just to produce production drawings, but we can use computers to help us create fractal designs, which are nature's geometry. We can use tools such as environmental psychology and anthropology and mind-body connection. All of these are new tools for designers to use in designing healthcare environments. Nature can be a problem solver. We just don't ask her enough to tell us how to do it. One of the ways we can learn about how to work with nature is looking at her, listening to her, and mimicking her. There's a great example in biomimicry that takes the lotus leaf and has found an answer that's a very powerful answer that can impact bacteria growth in healthcare environments. The lotus flower grows in the muddiest of waters, and the leaf is covered with, it's covered with little hairs that stand up. And when you have dirt that comes on these leaves, these hairs push the dirt off so nothing can adhere to it. Some scientists, I believe they were Swedish scientists, found this out and have integrated some of this technology into Gore outdoor clothing that repels water and dirt. So we can look to nature to help us solve some of the really complex problems. Biochemistry is where we're learning how to work with nature and solve some of the sustainable issues. We know that chemistry and toxicity in hospital environments are really, really tough. We know housekeeping and maintenance people use cleaning agents that are rated as pesticides. And you put this pesticide in environments with immune-suppressed patients. It's just not very healthy, to say the least. So we need to look at chemistry and find some of the natural ways of dealing with solving some of these toxicity problems that exist. Also, the power of sunlight. We're dealing with a lot of man-made lighting and institutions, but the power of sun and placing our windows and screening our windows and providing access to our windows that help lift our spirits and help us feel better. They also mitigate bacteria. There's all kinds of ways that sunlight is extremely helpful. And emotionally, it's very helpful. We know the SAD disorders, especially in the northern climates, are very prevalent without access to sun. So that whole tying into the circadian rhythm, access to light, access to nature, are all part of the healing process. We need to look at what science can tell us about light and color and how it really works, not just to how it creates a color palette, but how it actually impacts healing. Now, color and light have been used in healing and still used in healing, such as treating infants with jaundice is still used in healing. So we know that light is an element that impacts our cells and our bodies. So everything in our environment that has light in it is impacting us on a cellular level, and we have to recognize this. The nature of color, we have three aspects of color. I think we only, especially designers, think of color only as far as pigment, that which is absorbed, and the color that's reflected off of the absorption through the prism, or as we analyze it through a prism, is what we see as a color. But there's also two other ways that color is created, and one is like the little lizard here that can change colors and adapt to his environment. And how does he do that? How does he shift those scales to create different colors to blend into the light? These are things we want to know as a designer. And then the interference aspect of color, such as what we see in rainbows and how light reflects through other materials and products like rain and water. One of the most fascinating things that I have found is how color and patterns, specifically in fractals. Fractals is it's nature's geometry. We know our basic geometry, that is squares and rectangles and circles, but fractal geometry is based on the formation of how things fall in nature, how they're placed. So like a seashore, it's not a straight square. It's never a straight square. We don't see straight lines in nature, but it follows the edge of a water edge. Trees are a great example. You see the tree shows an example of fractals in the change of scale. We look at a leaf, and it's very much like a tree. You have the stem, and then you have the branches, and then you have the leaf part that makes up the tree. You look at the tree, and it's the same thing in a different scale. So when we play with scale, and I know you do this, you do it intuitively often, when you're looking at combining patterns together, and you know by intuition that this pattern goes with this. Why? Because it's part of our nature, our natural instinct to see what is pleasing in nature. So we can look at these aspects of fractals. We'll talk a little bit more how to apply these things. So when we select patterns, and the patterns of nature with leaves in them, with textures in them, with patterns of water, they tend to be patterns that are most pleasing and also the most long-lasting. In healthcare, we know that we don't change our environments that quickly like we do in retail or hospitality that have a greater changeover. But hospitals, sometimes we keep the same colors and materials for up to 20 years. So we can't go with the trends that are often seen in hospitality. We also look at aspects of nature such as layering. This is very popular. Actually, it evolved through anthropology, and how we have evolved through wanting to be in different places in our environment to either be seen or to see, to keep ourselves protected when we need to be and to be seen when we want to be. So, and that is accomplished through layering. We do that with furniture arrangements so that we can give people choices on where to sit or choose their seating. Fractal design, we talked about, so I'm going to go back where I can explain it in a diagram. This starts our case study, where those theories of nature, I'm going to explain how we actually put them into practice in this particular project. This project was actually in place before 9/11. And it was to design a healthcare emergency department for mass casualties that could flex between what's required in a very contingent situation to scale back down for everyday operations. But 9/11 changed everything. It put a rush on that project. And 9/11 in Washington, all the burn victims from the Pentagon were taken to Washington Hospital. So they were the only people that had burn units. So this is when they started to figure out how important an emergency that was very important, an emergency department. Initially, this project was developed as a new building project that we were in partnership with the firm HKS out of Dallas. This project never materialized after all these years. But what has happened is theories taken from the very early concepts of the ED have been applied now to the same hospital where this was to be built in various stages. So it became really a laboratory, if you will, of learning. Because when we started this project in 2000, actually it was in 1999 and 2000, we started this project specifically with the federal government and presented the need for this. In 2001, so 2001, Angela? I think maybe a couple of years later, it materialized into the first opportunity to take some of the theories and actually apply them in sections of the emergency department. And here you see 3 floor plans. The one to your far right was a new footprint actually carved out of some vacant space attached to the existing emergency room. And they became 3 distinct projects that became 3 distinct research projects that were part of Pebble Design. Anybody familiar with Pebble research projects? Okay. So the bridge to ER1 was the first project, and we called it the bridge because it was actually bridging theories of the ER1 to a practical application. And we had an opportunity to test these. And what we did from a design intervention is use organic design. We looked at how we could mitigate bacteria and pathogens. We looked at ways to provide access to nature specifically for the caregivers and the nursing team. We looked at providing a touch zone because we know in an emergency department room that we have a lot of bacteria going on, but the cleaning time between the rooms is not sufficient to clean everything in the room. So we looked ergonomically, where was it most likely that we were going to touch the walls? So we created a touch zone and defined it. We'll get into that. We used full spectrum color and light, and then some new interventions that were not part of the original ER1 theory bank was to improve the acoustics, which were really terrible, and to provide areas for staff respite. Now, when we were looking at how to deal with pathogens, it was primarily in finishes, and we looked at the areas most specifically prone to bacteria in an emergency patient room. And this is where we use Corian, solid surface material, to provide that because it's a very non-porous material and very easy to clean. And we looked at it for nurse stations, for surfaces that you see like in the countertops. We looked at it and how we had a continual connection between walls and base and floor. We looked at it in sinks. You see a Corian sink there. And the last one, the ergonomic touch zone, I think is one of the most exciting areas because this is an area in the wall, and those walls are totally all Corian walls, including the design that's kind of a willow pattern. But you see that band that's 18 inches, goes all the way around the room. And ergonomically, we found that person is most likely to touch that area. So when we go in and they have it cleaned, that room turned around, that they could clean it much quicker when they concentrated at where the most likely place for pathogens to occur. Also, we looked at the sinks and the sink surfaces, how they connected to the walls, and you can see in this image the back of the sink went directly into the touch zone, and that we used the integrated bowl that was connected into the countertop, so there's no place for crevices. We also looked at later at hands-free, so less we touch, the cleaner it remains, and there's not the places for bacteria to grow. So this was a very important element in design to discover how we could mitigate bacteria, which is a very critical part in the room. We also looked at the prospect and refuge that I mentioned earlier, and created 3 distinct zones that we could have. The first zone here is where the visitor could view the informational graphics, television, and information. The second zone was where the visitors could view the information desk and security. And the third zone where they could go, where they didn't have to be seen and on display, and they could sleep if they wanted to. So we found people that wanted to sleep did that in the third zone. So that's the way we had proposed it. Then we did some studies afterwards. We did some behavioral mappings, both before and after, to see where people chose to sit. This is the before emergency room, same facility, and the chairs were pretty much all lined up in one direction, and we charted the behavior on that. And then we charted after the construction to see what the behavior was. Then we also looked at how do we deal with the cycles of nature. You know, the emergency room, a 9-hour wait is not that unusual. It's awful. I'm sure, how many have not been in an emergency room? Okay, everyone's visited that environment. It's not a pleasant environment to be in. It's high stress. You don't know when you're going to be seen. You may be part of a very stressful event with yourself or with a loved one, but it's a very traumatic experience in life. So we used the knowledge and the theories of the cycles of nature and integrated it to lighting. So we very subtly changed through color kinetic lighting and programmed the cycle of nature based on the circadian rhythm to go from daylight to night lighting. And so that you never saw it actually change, you just experienced it. So we used light and color to be very much part of a natural environment. We used curved walls. This image on the top right is actually a Corian wall that's internally lit. It was lit on a programmable lighting that had nature carved into the back of it, so it had no uneven surfaces on the front, so it was totally cleanable. And then, you know, in an ED, those materials have to withstand everything. Everything bangs into it. They're used intensely 24/7. There's not another area in our environment that is so abused as the emergency room. And there's never time to shut it down and clean it or renovate it. So it's very important that those materials last until they're either changed places or move on. So our walls are Corian because they can be cleaned and that they're extremely durable. And then you see in the ceiling we have an organic pattern that captures an existing skylight. And you see 2 different colors of the same installation view that shows some of the contrast between morning light, which is on the front, and the end of day lighting, which is on your left. Another aspect that we found to be one of the most important in an emergency room is the access to information. One of the most stressful parts of waiting all of this time is not knowing where you are in the queue. And so patients and visitors come and hang out at the security desk or the information desk. They didn't have an information desk in the old one, only a security desk. Trying to find out, am I still in the system? Did I get lost? You know, I've been here over 2 hours. Where's my father? What's going on? I'm really, really stressed. Well, this new information display took the first letter of your first name and the first 3 letters of your last name and put a bar graph to show you how long who has been waiting in the waiting room. So if you see all the people in front of you and you just came in, you know you're going to have a long wait. So it doesn't particularly tell you how long your wait is, but you have a sense that you're still, you know for sure you're still in the queue. You know your name's up on the board. And then this goes off, it changes to entertainment, and then it changes to health information. So it has 3 different aspects. Been very well received. This is an example of the fractals on how it's designed that we used for this particular project. On the very top left, you see the footprint of the building, which is the center footprint. And you have a point that's out on the outside here, that arcs of the building are actually taken to the point to figure out how the building sits on the site in a natural way. And it links all patterning to the actual footprint of the building. And that forms some of the very graceful arches that you see. And then the designer, who in this case is Angela. Angela, raise your hand, because she figured this out in our office. And this is quite a remarkable project. This is the first one we use fractals based on such a abstract formation. But you see fractals in most Starbucks. You see the irregular patterns, and you don't know why they're there, but they're nice. Not all Starbucks, but a lot of them do. So this actually, when you get into creating the patterns that you see in the center design, is actually eliminating all the ones that are bothersome and only picking the ones. It's like a sculptor. Michelangelo said that Moses was in that rock of marble. He just pulled away what was left, and that's kind of like fractals. So we pull away what's left when we move on. So this is an installation how the fractals have actually portrayed in the environment of the ED. Another area that we worked very hard with research is workflow. And we have 3 different workstations here. The first one on your left is the traditional millwork nurse station that is typically what people build. And they're obsolete, of course, before they ever get installed, because millwork is permanent. And you can see the edges of wood and plastic laminate have all chipped off, and they're totally unsanitary, harboring a lot of pathogens. And the center one, we tried something different. Because the staff never really sits down. They're kind of hopping from they move fast in an ED situation. So we designed for a vertical workflow, that the information, we left perching stations and small amounts of horizontal work surface and brought everything up over it. The third installation was one we just installed this year, was a result of a lot of clinicians and staff didn't like the vertical one because it was so different. And they wanted to go back to the first one, but we wanted to keep it modular. So we kind of came up with a hybrid. Now that the hybrid's in, people are saying, I think we like the vertical workstation best. So we'll probably go back to that. We talked a little bit about biochemistry, the science of nature, and we're looking at silver ion technology. And you know, here in this city in Benjamin Franklin, you know, back in our federal period of this country, you carried your own silverware in your vest pockets because, and for babies' birth gifts, you were often given the silver spoon. Child with a silver spoon in their mouth was lucky. Why? Because silver mitigates bacteria. And so we found the silver ion technology. We used it in this case in cubicle curtains that was woven in. We used it in paint. We used it in many applications. We tried it. Some places did not work. Some places it interfered with electronic technology. So there was a lot of learning experience with this. One of my favorite areas was the testing we did of positive distractions, because I feel that distractions are a great way, and as designers, you know how to pull it off. You know, we know how to make rooms look bigger. We know how to make rooms look smaller. We know how to draw attention to a certain element, and we know how to make them go away. And then it's kind of like a magician. They can achieve their craft by distracting you from what they're really doing, and then voila, we have magic. Well, designers are much like magicians. They use positive distractions to play down the negative aspects and to highlight positive aspects, to take your mind off of how long you're really waiting and how stressed and angry you really are. Doesn't totally work, but we found there's two major distractions, both positive and negative, and we know what both of those are. We also have passive and active distractions, those which we are that we must engage in to make the distraction occur, or ones that simply exist, and if you tie into it or connect to it, you are distracted. So we looked at positive distractions that, much like nature, now some of the human distractions are things like actually sleeping or viewing the TV or gazing outside. There's also no observable distractions, such as people watching or staring into space. And then we have things that we add through design interventions like color and pattern, kinetic lighting, art, and fish. So these are things we added into the environment. So, and then we looked at active distractions. You see this little girl here, this young lady, she's engaged with this image on the wall. That's also a Corian wall, because people put their hands all over it, and we want it something that can be cleaned very easily. But we have a projector above that projects the image, and it scatters. You might have seen these at airports or shopping centers. They're projected images. If there's a pond on the floor, you can step in it and scatter the fish. Whatever. They're projections that you actually interact with. So we used the interactive video on the wall that provided an added distraction. Also, negative distractions are something that we have to eliminate. First, like Florence Nightingale said, do no harm. So one of the difficult things is seeing other people in pain, hearing noises, people crying, a baby crying in an emergency room if you're very upset with what's going on. These kind of things are very problematic for you as you're waiting. So we're trying to eliminate negative distractions. That's where we improve the acoustics tremendously. We used a poured rubber floor that improved the acoustics as well as staff comfort. And the ceiling rated, we got the highest ceiling rated acoustical ratings we could to help improve that. So bottom line, after we got all this done over a period of 10 years, we looked at what we started with at the beginning, and we looked at the 3 distinct projects, and we had engaged in research. We had at the beginning of 10 years, we did an extensive literature review. Much of that is in the book on what's the proof. We also engaged in 3 separate research projects with Pebble, and Pebble is a unique healthcare design research base that specifically measures design in the healthcare environment, design research. So it's very exciting. And of the Pebble research, we had 3 projects. We did one that was specifically on bacteria mitigation, where the finishes and materials played a really important role. The second was in the the workflow that really dealt with the nurse stations. And the third study, which was the last one, was on positive distractions. In addition to those studies with Pebble, the hospital itself did hospital-based research, specifically in having results from their patient satisfaction studies and HCAP scores. And then we worked with vendors to gain additional research. Some of them included Herman Miller that we looked at. They did a white paper with us exploring workflow and with Corian and some of the bacteria mitigation. So, and then we also worked with the manufacturer of rubber floors, Stonehard, and we're collecting a lot of information, and they've been partners in helping us understand some of the properties of these materials so we can know better how to use them, and we don't go through the expense of designing something to find out it doesn't work or it interferes with technology or other things that we have learned. In addition, our own firm has participated in research studies. We've been very involved in all of the research with Pebble. We've also done observational studies and literature reviews and specifically product coordination. Now these, I won't go through all of them, but these are some of this was the earliest evidence, before evidence-based design was even a word. This is what we had done, and this is what we based our theories on at the very beginning, dealing with natural color palette, organic design, and the high touch zone I thought was a very innovating approach to helping us define where bacteria ends up, and then positive distractions. And we use this evidence from research in our initial theories. This was in our original. And then when we did the bridge, which was the first actual project that we built, this is where we did specific research high in the pathogen mitigation and hospital errors. We looked at what might help mitigate hospital errors, how do we help the staff find the way to wash their hands, how do we encourage it through design, how do we provide staff respite, and then improving the workflow. And then the outcomes here, we find that through, for example, appropriate light, we can reduce staff falls. One of the things we found that with our hand washing, we designed some of the fractal patterns to point directly to the hand washing sink, and people saw it. Just intuitively, they saw it. They didn't even know they were looking for it. They saw it because the environment led them to it. So we were surprised with some of the outcomes. Also, let's see, the improved communication through the sound was also a outcome we had not projected, and improving the social support with the rooms that were designed to accommodate the family. So some of these things were a bit of a surprise. I'll go through, let's see. These were some of the additional aspects, decreased staff fatigue, and these were actual outcomes that we improved communication, decreased back pain, the surge capacity. The surge capacity relates to how does an emergency room surge when there's a big influx, like a major accident, and how do they handle it, and the patients, and then scale back to when it's not so busy. So a lot of flexibility was brought into that. The front door project, which was our research that was based on positive distractions, had some very interesting aspects. The decreasing the patient and family stress. One of the big problems that we had was visitors and patients left before being seen. So they had a very major loss in revenue because people left. And that number changed dramatically between pre and post observations. We did questionnaires with staff. We interviewed people from nurses to physicians, all staff with questionnaires, how they felt in their new environment, what kind of outcomes. And you can see this is a result of the staff. The dark blue is after the fact, the light blue is before the fact, and you can see noise reduction, work surfaces, use of the workstation, lighting, all dramatically improved with the new environment. This is also the ability to observe patients went the other way. That's the only one that did not. And this was in the one nurse's station that the vertical versus the horizontal. That was one of the big triggers to lead us to moving to back to a more traditional model, except making it more modular. So we actually learned things from that. The value, they called it the feel-good ED waiting room, was the hospital kind of termed it that, and it was the patient satisfaction score for the Pebble projects improved tremendously, and the HCAPS as well. So let's see, this just shows our HCAPS. Our HCAPS are the consumer assessment of healthcare providers and systems. So this is really the users, the patients, the visitors who use the space. And these are some of the questions that they had to address. The communication, pain management, various, that's what. And so what we got from the HCAPS scores was also a significant measurement of improvement. The blue is the new, the pink is the old. So from got help as soon as I wanted it, improved just in the new environment. And you don't think of design as being able to impact things like, did the users in your environment get help that they wanted? But the perception definitely improved just through the design. So even those questions are not design related. The design changed it. Of course, it also changed staff's attitude to the environment, and you had a different staff member, even though they were the same person. The informed regarding the length of time improved dramatically, and that was primarily because of the information board. That is a major positive impact from design. So in communications, it improved. And so to summarize this is the when we felt that this project is a significant visionary approach to design for healthcare. And we believe it is because it being based on nature, we looked for nature on how to solve problems. We used materials naturally, and even though we're not using all natural materials, we're using them in a natural sense. And that we look to nature to help us solve these problems. And if you're familiar with Leonardo da Vinci, I think his whole childhood he spent discovering nature. He examined how birds of wings were made so that they might fly. And it was totally based on nature. And I think as designers, when we look to nature on how to solve problems, we can really find some significant components. So these were our core concepts that we used over the last 10 years, and we really, truly feel it made a difference. The images here, the image on the left is the waiting room before, the image on the right is the waiting room after, the image on the left on the bottom is the work core, the center of the ED, and the one on the right is after. So I love this by Ms. Benyus that has stated she's has a wonderful saying on nature. Nature runs on sunlight. It uses only the energy it needs. It fits the form to the function. It recycles everything. It rewards cooperation. It banks on diversity. And it demands local expertise. And it curbs excess from within. And it taps into the power of limits. And I think this is a wonderful design mantra to incorporate nature into the environment. I'd love to answer questions, but before I do, I want to make sure that you put your cards in here. And also, I wanted to introduce this sink that is, it's making its debut, and you can talk to the folks in Bill Schimmel, who is going to be distributing. Bill, you want to stand up so they know who you are? If you have questions on this sink, talk to Bill. It's available now. It's part of, I have to say, the Hygeia collection. Hygeia is the Greek goddess of hygiene, and she is a goddess of health. And what's more appropriate than hand washing and the goddess of Hygeia? This sink will be available in 3 models. This is the Hydros, which means health. And it also has 2 other designs, one a little bit more geometric. That's called the Cana, which is significant of Hippocrates' staff. And then thank you, which is the medicine bowl in Greek medicine. So the 3 sinks are going to be available as single sinks like this. They're also going to be available in gang sinks that can be used in public facilities. But they've been designed to be very sensitive to nature and the curved and organic forms, easy to clean. There's no crevices for any pathogens to collect. And we thank very much Bill Schimmels with Inspiration Environments, and Briggs, who's going to make them, and Corian, who provides the materials to make them with. So if you want to get into questions, and make your way and drop your card in, we'll deal with that. You're welcome. Questions? Yes. How great was the costing? It's really hard to put a cost on it because much of it was experimental, and it was not part of a true construction project, even though we had the architecture as a structure of the product. Because we're using materials experimentally and we change things in the process, we really don't have a fixed cost as to what it would be, say, if you were going to do it now in the future. So I think as we do, and we have heard that many of the components like the touch rail and things have gone on to other areas in the hospital, it would probably be more accurate. But if I gave you a figure of the actual construction, that would not be something that anybody would be tempted to try. But a lot of it was trial and error and taking things out and putting it back in. And then I think one of the things, by the time we got to the third project with it, we knew so well that the Corian walls with the touch rail were so successful, and that it shortened the time to clean the rooms. And I think there was one, I didn't spend the time on it, how much quicker that it saved so much money in staff turnover and in cleaning the room alone, and the reduction of pathogens in the areas. And those are hard to put cost on now, but we are trying to build a business case for it. There is a study done by the Center for Health Design that is called the Fable Project, and I think you can get it online from the Center for Health Design. And it is a business case model with various components of evidence-based design that will take into account what the first-time cost was to build it versus the long-term cost on the value of the long-term cost. But the materials are definitely more expensive, and we had rooms done side by side to test them. So we had our standard rooms, and then we had what was called the protected room. The protected room had rubber floor, Corian walls. It had the higher acoustically rated ceilings, and the silver ion cubicle curtains. And then we had the standard room that was built like a standard ED today. And we did that to achieve the what it would medical or from a research basis, but we did not do that for a cost model. But that would be a great thing to do, and I think we can still do that. Yes. Questions?
Barbara,